What's up, my fellow harmonic traders? Welcome back to Track the Harmonic, your go-to destination for all things harmonic technical analysis. I'm your host, Lord MC. In today's video, we're diving into the world of harmonic technical analysis to forecast potential market movements and prepare for next week's crucial economic data releases. So we're going to talk about harmonic technical analysis in the charts in just a bit, but for those of you who are new to the channel, I'm going to explain briefly what harmonic technical analysis is. This is just a method that uses geometric price patterns to predict future market trends. This approach can be incredibly powerful in identifying potential reversal points in the markets based on the Fibonacci sequence. And before we get into the charts, I quickly just wanted to break down some key economic data that's expected to be released next week. So first up on the agenda this upcoming week is the durable good orders. So this measures the new orders placed with domestic manufacturers for delivery of hard goods. It's a vital indicator of production and economic health, as an increase could suggest higher business confidence and consumer spending capacity. Next up this week, which is a very important metric here in GDP, better known as the gross domestic product, we're going to look at the GDP growth rate, which is the broadest indicator of economic activity and the primary gauge of the economy's health. So a rising trend could suggest a positive effect on consumer confidence and market stability. Third on our list is personal income. So this metric involves the total income received by individuals, and it directly affects consumer spending. Changes here can indicate future consumer behavior in terms of savings and spending. Last on our list here is the earnings reports. Last week we did have earnings with banks. We also had a preview in the semiconductor space where TSM reported earnings, as well as the streaming services sector there with Netflix reported earnings. So this week we do have some major reports that are due out. These can significantly sway market sentiment and cause fluctuations in stock prices. So some of these companies from different sectors that are reporting next week, for example, are Verizon, GM, UPS, General Electric, Tesla, Visa, Boeing, AT&T, Meta, Ford. We have Microsoft as a big company that are reporting, as well as Google and Intel. And to finish the week on Friday, we have some of the energy sector reporting earnings like Exxon and Chevron. So it's going to be a very volatile week with a lot of different companies from different sectors that are going to report earnings. So we're going to see how the market reacts, especially after a very bearish week. So if you find this type of analysis helpful and want to see more, make sure to hit that like button, comment down below your thoughts or questions, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss any future videos. Having said that, I also want to preface by saying I'm not a financial advisor. None of the things I say in my video or anywhere else is ever financial advice. So question everything, do your own research, and come out with your own conclusions. So having said that, let's jump right into those charts. Jumping over to the SPY here. So obviously we had a very bearish week. We had the first time SPY closed with 6 red candles for the first time since 2022. So what can we expect here, harmonically speaking, for the SPY? I'm going to jump over to the 3-day because we talked about this in the last video, where we're looking at HOP to see if it was going to fail HOP, and it finally lost HOP at 498.57. We do have this bearish bat pattern here. To bring out my other indicators here, we did lose HOP there. So the next level, harmonically speaking, here would be to retest terminal bar here at 473.73. roughly where the 50 SMA is at. On the oscillators, on the HSI and the amplified RSI, they're completely oversold. So you could potentially find a HSI arrow here if you get volume back up to the upside, especially if you reclaim HOP at 490.57. You might see an HSI arrow for a potential reversal, or at least a bounce, a relief bounce here after 6 days in a row. If we go over to the daily as well, we obviously are now in a downtrend here after confirming we lose the 50 EMA actually increased in volume. The RSI is almost oversold. The amplified and the HSI are at critical levels. They're at completely oversold conditions. So you could expect a potential reversal back up. So what are those levels that I would like SPY to reclaim if it finds support? Would be to find support here. So this white line that you see is from a channel that we've been trading. We broke above after you could tell this goes all the way back from September 22. We were in this channel. We had a few retests here at that high there in July. We came down for a low retest of the channel here in the October lows, and then we broke out of it in January, where we created new all-time highs, and we did retest that top of that trend line on Friday. We actually closed below it. So to the downside here, I have one more level where SPY could hit before it finally catches support, and that's at 491.42. Should it fail that level, there are a few gap fills there around 489 as well as 483 and change. Losing that, obviously, you can come back all the way down to 465.96, where you can see this is the channel that it was kind of in. You broke above it here, and then you had resistance slightly here, and then you broke higher. So if you fail that level there, in my opinion, you can come very bearish here to 465.96, which would also match where the 200 SMA is at, right? The only thing right here, harmonically speaking, on the oscillators is you're kind of oversold here, so you could have a relief bounce maybe to reclaim the 50 EMA, which is at 507. Obviously that's a little bit too far out there to call that level, but if we're looking at the 3-day here and the 2-day, we want to reclaim at least a minimum 498.57. Above 498, we also have a level that I need SPY to reclaim, which is at 502.21, which was a level this whole week it had resistance at. It tried to break above it and failed. We got as high as 504, but then it quickly came back down. So 502.21 is a new target I'm going to be looking at for that to reclaim. So above that, then obviously we could reclaim 515.85 and then 520, which would be almost the all-time highs. Obviously we're not there. We're going to have to rely on what these companies report with earnings. Something to note on the weekly here is that it was an increase in volume and the MACD has switched red. So either you find support here at the 21 EMA, which is also matching up with that top of that trend line there. If you lose that level, we could potentially be trading back in that channel. Obviously key critical spot here, but at least some of these oscillators are potentially saying that a reversal could be incoming, or at least a bounce, a relief bounce here to test some of these levels. So we're going to see how SPY reacts this week with all these companies that are reporting. So definitely keep a close eye on SPY. Jumping over to the triple Qs here. So last week's video I mentioned that we had a bearish shark pattern where we had a bit of resistance here at hop. We had 7 attempts on the weekly and it finally failed here, hop, and you came down below the 1.13 of the shark pattern, which was at 424.12. So it did lose a 21 EMA on the weekly, where SPY has yet to lose it here. So if this continues here on the weekly, I was just going to take some time to play out. The next level here harmonically would be the terminal bar there at 387.98, where the 50 EMA and SMA are at. So losing that level down the line, you obviously complete the type 1 reaction where the 200 EMA is at 324.20. Right now the HSI still has some room to the downside, as well as the RSI has a lot more room to the downside. If we go over to the 3-day and the 2-day, we do have a pattern as well there. So obviously this lost 428.79, and the 50 EMA here, the next retest would be around 410 to 405, where the 50 MSMA is at, and then the terminal bar at 393.07. Completely oversold on the HSI and the amplified RSI. If we go over to the daily here and I bring up my drawings, we did have an increase in volume here on Friday. So the next level that I have for the Qs here is a retest of 408.71. If you lose that level here, the next level I'd be looking at would be the terminal bar there at 394, just slightly below where the 200 SMA is at 396. The 200 EMA is at 398. So you could come back down. Maybe you find support at 408.71 and you stay in this range where you obviously broke above it here, failed retest, broke above it, and then you traded in this channel now. So we could be finding some key level support here, potentially here for the Qs. If it doesn't, then we have more continuation to the downside. You also have a gap all the way down here to 377, as well as a few gaps to the downside. So right now the RSI, HSI, and the amplified RSI are completely oversold. So we'll see if a bounce is incoming here on the Qs. But the Qs right now looks a little bit more bearish than the SPY, especially after closing the 21 EMA off of increase in volume. So that level that I'm going to be looking for support is at 408.71. If you lose that, then you can see that test of the psychological level at 400, and you have some targets here to the downside. To the upside, you would need to bounce. If it does retest at 408.71, the next level you need to reclaim, in my opinion, here would be 419 to 420, where the 21 EMA is at, and reclaim OB here at 424.12, and then 445.47 down the line. Obviously, we're going to have to wait to see how these companies report earnings to see if SPY actually reverses here or not. So definitely keep a close eye on the triple Qs. Jumping over to the Dow Jones here. So the Dow Jones has this ABCD pattern here that's bearish on the weekly. It did come test below the 21 EMA off that wick, off of increase in volume, but managed to close above the 21 EMA at 379.80 off of Friday's close. So what can we expect here harmonically? We do have the oscillator here reaching these oversold conditions, but it still has room to the downside. In my opinion, that level to watch out is the 21 EMA, where it's at right now. If you do lose this level, you could accelerate maybe to complete the type 1 reaction at target 1 at 346.33. But before that, you do have to come back to test 364, 358 and change here to the upside. As I bring up my drawings here, it's this line here is actually, if you take a trend line from all the way down to the 2009-2008 lows, this actually is a channel that I've been following here. You obviously had some resistance here. Here you as well as back in 2022, and this is where we finally broke above it. So this is actually also coming in to retest a key level here, in my opinion. So you did kind of almost touch it, and you found support above it on the weekly. If we jump over to the 1-day chart here, which is interesting here, on the 1 day we did have 7 days here for the Dow Jones of pressure to the downside, and on Thursday you formed an HSI arrow, and Friday you had an increase in volume, which was the highest increase in volume. We had 5 million volume come in, and something that's an anomaly here, in my opinion, here is the spread of that candle, right? If we go over to this candle here on Monday the 15th of April, it had 4.8 million. The spread of this candle was much higher than this one on more increase in volume. So I want to see if this is maybe a trap potentially here. If you do reclaim these levels, obviously you now have a bit of resistance to the upside. So next level I would be looking at would be the 50 EMA, roughly where the 21 EMA is at. So that's around 384 and change, call it 385. So right now the HSI did form, and that is indicating a reversal to the upside. So we still have to come across the HSI midline. The RSI also is curling up, as well as the amplified RSI. So we're going to see how much of a bounce here the Dow Jones can get. That level to the upside I would need it to reclaim is 385, and then 388, and then finally reclaim 392. There is a gap to fill up to 394.44. If you fill this trend line here, this 2009 trend line, which is roughly around 375 and change, the next level I have to the downside is 369, the 200 EMA at 367, and the 200 SMA at 362. So we'll see if the Dow Jones is indicating maybe a relief bounce here is coming. So definitely keep a close eye on the Dow Jones. Jumping over to IWM here. So the Russell 2000 bit bearish here off of increase in volume on the weekly. We closed on Friday at 193.14, and it looking right now like a potential setup here is known as the black crows, 3 black crows, which could indicate more downside is incoming for the Russell 2000 if it doesn't find support here. You did come and lose the 200 SMA here off the weekly, but managed to close just above it. So what can we expect here harmonically for the Russell 2000? One thing I wanted to just quickly talk about is the white swan here, where PT2 is at 193.35. You could tell that at this point here it was false breakout once, twice, 3 times, and then the 4th time he finally broke out, found support, and then created a higher high here. Unfortunately, now it's back at that same range again. So if this does not find support real quick, you could just see that where it comes down to, back down to the lows here at 162. So between 160 and 162, you could also tell that it goes back into that channel, right? So if IWM does not find support here, the next level would be 189 and change, and then 184 and change, where the 200 EMA is at. You do have a few gaps to fill on the daily here. So if we jump over to the daily, you are currently above the 200 EMA off of increase in volume on Friday. So if this doesn't find support, the 200 SMA is calling there at 189, giving more confluence to that weekly target where the 50 EMA is at. Target 1 here for the bearish grab pattern is at 186, and then PT1 off the dragon pattern is at 184.29, giving more confluence to that level on the 200 EMA on the weekly. Below that, obviously you get a little bit bearish at 177.14. That completes the type 1 reaction all the way down to the crab pattern there, as well as a gap fill over here up to 170. Obviously we're a little bit too far out there. The HSI is completely oversold. The same thing with the amplified RSI, and it's starting to curl up, as well as the RSI. You could start potentially getting an HSI arrow to the upside, but you would need volume to support that. So to the upside here, the next level I'd obviously be looking at here would be to reclaim 196, the 50 EMA, and then 21 EMA, roughly around $200. Obviously for IWM here, you need to reclaim 200, specifically 201.99. There is a gap to fill all the way up to 204. So hopefully if IWM manages to find support here and the volume comes in to get bullish again, you definitely want this to be above 200. Otherwise, we do have more downside that could be incoming. So definitely keep a close eye on IWM. Jumping over to XLF here, the financial sector, we do have a bearish shark pattern on the weekly. This formed 3 weeks ago at the completion of point C. You could tell that there was an HSI arrow to the downside, indicating that reversal was coming off of that hanging man there. So you did lose last week, 2 weeks ago, the terminal bar at 40.47, and you did wick down below the 13 EMA. Didn't really test the 21 EMA here, but did lose the terminal bar here now for 2 weeks in a row. So what can we expect here for the financial sector? To the downside, the next level I would be looking at would be 39.20, where the 21 EMA is at. Losing that level, you come down to maybe retest $37 and change, and then where the 50 SMA is at, roughly at target 1, and that would complete the type 1 reaction at 35.91. The weekly here on the HSI still got room to the downside before it reaches any critical levels of oversold conditions here, where you could potentially form an HSI arrow to the upside. This almost flipped here Friday. I believe the bank started to push up a little bit, got close. This is a hammer candle here on the downturn, but I would have wished this would have closed green here and then maybe find support of the terminal bar to indicate a strong indication that a reversal is incoming, right? That would have flipped green, giving it high volume, and that would have been a hammer candle on the downtrend. You could still argue that this is still a hammer candle and there was some absorption here, but I would have liked it to close above the terminal bar. It got really close. It's not that far up, but obviously for me here off the weekly, if this is going to come to the upside to fill these levels here for the type 2 return to hop, it would need to have, you know, one more week, maybe a reclaim of terminal bar, so you could see 42.92 and then 44.59 down the line. If we go over to the 1 day here chart, we do have also this this butterfly pattern where you did get a 921 crossover here and you had increase in volume. Obviously there was a lot of banks reporting earnings. Some did good, some did okay, some did decent, and some didn't do so good. So it was all over the place. Obviously there was more than that going on this week with the whole Israel and Iran war there. So what can we expect here on the daily for the butterfly pattern? So the next level I would be looking at, as you could tell, that on Thursday the 18th here we had the HSI arrow flip here. So this means a potential reversal is incoming. It did reclaim hop at 39.93. It was decent volume on Friday. So right now the HSI, as you could tell, was oversold, which is why you got that HSI arrow. As well as the amplifier RSI is coming up, and the RSI. So the next level to the upside would be the 21 EMA here at 40.72, and then to reclaim 41.70, which was the previous all-time high there, and then maybe you can create a new higher high down the line. If you fail resistance here at 39.93, then I would be looking at these targets here to the downside. XA of the butterfly would be at 38.92, BC at 38.33. So this is kind of a big deal here. You could argue this is almost looks like an inverse cup and handle. You could come back to that 21 EMA, finish that handle, and then if volume rejects there with high volume, then you can maybe start to see that inverse cup and handle play out towards 38.33, and even down to maybe even worse, down to the type 1 reaction to complete this pattern. Target 1 is calling at $36 right there, but BC 38.33, below that then you have 37.42 and then 36.62. So it's going to be kind of important here for the financial sector to see what it does here, because the HSI is also approaching that midline, and that could roughly be there around that 21 EMA, around $40 and change. So definitely keep a close eye out on the financial sector. Jumping over to XOLE here, the energy sector. So the energy sector here had a bit of a pullback. You had this bearish shark pattern on the daily. It did manage to close below hop for 3 days in a row, but on Friday managed to reclaim hop above 94.46, where it closed just slightly above those targets at 94.97 on Friday. So what can we expect here harmonically from the bearish shark pattern? I want to bring your attention to the HSI here. The HSI was in these oversold conditions. So right now, if your volume continues to pick up here, you could potentially generate an HSI arrow, meaning the reversal back up is coming here, maybe to reclaim $99 here at that high. 98.97, and then maybe push towards $100 and then 101.52. Should it find resistance here and lose hop there at 94.46, the next level I would be looking at would be the terminal bar there at 92.22, and then the 886 of the shark pattern at 91.01, just slightly above the 50 SMA. Losing these levels here obviously creates that potential for the type 1 reaction to come back all the way down to target 1 at 85.6, but before you get there, you will maybe have support there at 87.36, right where the 200 EMA and SMA are. If we go over to the weekly here, the weekly did print a hanging man here with an HSI arrow, meaning a reversal to the downside is incoming here. And this kind of almost is reminiscent to what the IWM chart looks like here. You had almost like a double top here. You did break out of this level here, and you could be coming down more long term here to test that 90.56 level. Should you come down there, you might come back all the way down to this range here at $84. 82.51 is a key level I'd be looking at if it does come down any further, and maybe back down here to the 75 level. So it's going to be interesting to see what the energy sector does here, especially with the whole Middle East thing going on. So definitely keep a close eye on XLE. All right, looking over here on Apple. So Apple does have a few things going on. There's a bullish bat pattern, there's a bullish white swan, and in a little bit I'm going to cover the bullish dragon pattern that it also has on the 1 day. But I want to talk about the bullish bat pattern here because at the completion of the pattern, you actually came up here and got very close to the type 1 reaction. At target 1 was calling 179.53, and you fell short. You got as high as 178.36, so you almost completed that type 1 reaction. Fortunately, it was not able to hold these levels, and it came down for a type 2 return off of the bullish bat pattern. You lost XA there at 169.54, which was the key level, and then now you're potentially coming back down to hop there to complete the type 2 return at 160.88. Off of the bullish white swan, at the completion of the pattern, this actually completed the type 1 reaction, closed above PT2 there, but unfortunately was not able to hold it, and you came with some volume pressure to the downside, and now completed the type 2 return on the white swan pattern to OPR at 163.97. So if this is able to find support here, you'll be looking at these targets back to the upside. If not, then you complete the type 2 return to hop there from the bullish bat pattern at 160.88. I'm going to quickly bring over the dragon pattern. There is a bullish dragon pattern here. So off the bullish dragon pattern, you can see at the completion of the pattern, it also failed to go to the target 1 at 188.81, roughly where the 200 SMA is at, and instead you came down to OPR at 165.72. So the next level to the upside here, if Apple reclaims these levels, is to reclaim 167.11, and more importantly, would like Apple to reclaim 169.54. Above that, then maybe you could start seeing these targets once again. But looking at the HSI crossing the midline, it looks like it wants to come back down to maybe retest 160.88. I also have some levels to watch out for. One of those levels that unfortunately it lost this week was 166.25. If it did not reclaim these levels, the next level I would be looking at, like I said, would be hop at 160, and there is a gap to fill at 158.46. It usually, Apple, when they lose this level, harmonically speaking, it likes to trade in a range here, so between 166.25 and 155.86. As you could tell, the last time we broke above that, we had resistance at 166, came back down, and finally broke, and we created higher highs. Before that, we also had, false breakout, came back down. So there is some confluence here. There is a trading range there. So I would be looking to see if Apple decides to come back down. These have these levels to the downside. Obviously, 160 gap fill out 158 and then 155.86. Losing that, then it can get very bad for Apple. If it manages to just trade in this range, we could look for a reversal once the HSI is completely over sold. If we go to the weekly, we do have this bearish dragon pattern on the weekly. So target 1, very similar to my targets here. So target 1 is at 156.44. You have slight decrease in volume, but it looks like it's not too much of a difference between last week's volume at 322 versus 309 million volume. Right now the HSI looks like it's creeping back up, but it may be curling back down. Maybe it decides to come back to test 160.49 and then to complete the type 1 reaction off the bearish dragon pattern at 156.44. Below that, then you have the 200 SMA at 153 and the 200 EMA at 147 and change. So that would actually also complete the or retest the previous target 1 there at 146.62 off of the bullish weekly bat pattern there. So it's going to be very interesting to see if Apple find support around these levels. Otherwise, we will see Apple in the 150s again. So definitely keep a close eye on Apple. Jumping over to Microsoft here. So Microsoft on the 1 day currently has this bearish dragon pattern where it completed the type 1 reaction all the way to target 2 at 398.39. It got as low as 397.77 on Friday, but managed to close at 399.12. So what can we expect for Microsoft if there is more downside? I would be looking to see if it comes down and retest target 1 at 391.74 from the previous dragon pattern that formed back in early March. Below that, then you have the 200 EMA there at 373 and target 2 to complete that dragon at 366.50, slightly below the 200 SMA. As you can tell here, one of the levels I'd be looking at to see if Microsoft is going to hold is 386.73. The last time we broke above that was in a range between 349 and 386. As you could tell here, was in this channel, finally broke above, and it created a higher high and the new all-time high. So this level here for me is going to be very important to see if it holds. If it doesn't hold, then we might be trading in this range here between 386 and 349. Obviously, the three black crows it generated on the daily could mean more downside is incoming. If we go over to the weekly, like everything else, and most of these tickers have come down on their weekly to test the 21 EMA here. So Microsoft is doing the same thing. The HSI here still had room to the downside if it continues. With more downwards pressure, the next level, like I said, would be 386. This is more long-term off the weekly chart to revisit the bearish shark pattern here at 368.74, roughly just above the 50 EMA. So we're going to see if Microsoft is going to bounce from here, because if not, then it can get very interesting really quick. They do report earnings on Thursday, I believe, so we'll see what Microsoft has to say with those numbers that come out. So definitely keep a close eye on Microsoft. Jumping over to Amazon here. So Amazon, no current harmonic pattern on the daily. You do have a previous ABCD pattern we could look at for levels of support. So right now you are about to get a potential 921 crossover to the downside. Friday's volume was an increasing selling pressure. You close the day at 174.63, roughly below the 50 EMA. So what can we expect if there is more downside? I'll be looking at the entrance of the gap here. So that's roughly around 167 and change. Below that you have 162.25 where Hop is at, and then you complete the gap fill there around 159 and change. Losing that gap there, you can come back down to test target 1 at 153.25 where the 200 EMA is at, and then you have the 200 SMA where target 2 is just slightly below that at 148. One thing to note right now is that Amazon is completely oversold on the HSI, so you could maybe generate a potential reversal here to test some of these levels that it did lose. I do want to note that there is a 2-day harmonic on Amazon here. There's a bearish shark pattern at the completion of point C here. You had the HSI arrow, meaning that reversal back down was incoming, and you did lose the 21 EMA here. So there is some confluence now at that entrance of that gap, as you could tell here that the 86 of the shark pattern at OB is at 166.55, roughly where the entrance of the gap is at. The last time you came down there, you did find support above that. So if it manages to lose that, that's also where the 50 EMA is at, and then you have more so target 1 here at 135 to complete that type 1 reaction. Off the weekly, you could tell that it came down below OB here the first time here since the pattern was generated last week. So you did close below OB, which was at 175.95. So like everything else, a lot of these takers are coming to test their 21 EMA, and that's exactly right at the entrance of the gap. So if you manage to find support there, the HSI did cross the midline. If it does not manage to find support here, then you could come back down potentially all the way to target 1 at 135.60. So Amazon also will be reporting earnings pretty soon here as well. I believe it is on the 30th of April. So definitely keep a close eye on Amazon. Jumping over to Tesla here. So I mentioned in my last video that Tesla was a little bit bearish here if it didn't reclaim some of these levels. You currently have this bullish Gartley on the daily where it finally came down here to almost test Hop exactly. Fell a little bit short, but Hop is at 145.61, and it got really close at 146.22 being the low on Friday. So this did create that lower low I was talking about, and right now you could retrace for a potential lower high. As I bring up my drawings here, there's a few things that happened once it lost 164.67. I mentioned last video that if you lose that level, then you were more than likely going to fill that gap that it had there around the 145, 150 mark, and that's exactly what it did. You came and filled that gap now. So right here, I do mention that if it lost that level, it's going to be very important to see if it holds, because if it doesn't, the last time you broke down from this, you came all the way down to test 101.81 there. So as you could tell, that was support back there in January, and you came back up and reclaimed these levels and managed to create higher highs. Fortunately, that's not the case right now. Right now, the RSI here is almost completely oversold. The HSI is completely oversold, and the amplified RSI is oversold as well. So you could maybe reverse here. Maybe you fill these gaps, you retest that level again around 164, 167, and maybe you create that lower high and then come back down, because there is another gap to fill there around 113, 115 and change, somewhere around there. That doesn't mean that gaps have to be filled, but there is that case. If there is more downwards pressure here within the market, especially with everything that's going on. They also report earnings this week, so if those numbers don't come out bullish, then you could see Tesla come potentially all the way down here. So if it does manage to hold support here above hop, you do have a bullish divergence here on the daily, so you could be looking for a potential push back up to reclaim some of these levels. If we go over to the weekly, you can see that the Garley pattern there came down here to test hop at 145.61, and that's a solid candle there. So it's very key point Tesla's here at, because if it doesn't find support, then like I've said, you come back down to test these levels close to that $100 range. So I'm going to be paying attention this week to how Tesla reports in those earnings, because there's going to be a very volatile week for Tesla. So definitely keep a close eye on Tesla. Jumping over to Google here. So Google currently has this bearish C-crab on the daily where it is finding support around XA. They're at 154.21. On Friday, it did manage to close below a few cents at 154.09. It came close to losing the 21, but managed to absorb some of that pressure and closed slightly above it. So right now, Google, compared to some of these blue chips, has yet to retrace the way some of these other companies have come down to losing their 50 EMA and SMA. So if there is some downwards pressure that's coming for Google, because Friday volume did pick up on the high side, the next levels to the downside to be looking at would be the test of the 50 EMA on the daily here around 148 and change, the 50 SMA around 146. You would close the gap there potentially there at 143.18. That would also complete the type 1 reaction from the bearish C-crab. Target 1 is calling at 142.17. Below that you have 139.49, and the retest of the 200 EMA would be around 137. So the HSI looks like it is approaching these oversold conditions, and that could be anywhere all the way down to target 1, maybe even worse down to target 2 at 133.78. More macro target that I have it, Google being very bearish is underneath 128.71, but we're obviously way above that for the time being. On the weekly, you do have the white swan, bearish white swan, and a bearish shark pattern where it's managing to close above the terminal bar there at 153.05 and CD there at 153.78. So to the upside, you have targets there at hop at 161 again, and then 162. Losing this level here around that 153 range, you could come back down for that 149, 148, and then the 21 EMA at 143.77, where that gap is exactly at. So right now, like I've said, some of these blue chips have come down on their weekly to test the 21. As you could tell here, Google is still above the 9 EMA here and has not yet come anywhere close to the 21. So right now Google is one of the strongest ones right now to be trading above this range. So definitely keep a close eye as they report earnings this week as well. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's finally some retracement on Google. So watch out for Google. Jumping over to Meta here. So Meta has no harmonic pattern still on the daily. So one thing to note is that Meta did lose the 50 EMA on Friday where it closed at 481.07. So what can we expect here for Meta? Just looking at the technicals here, you also had a 921 crossover to the downside, meaning more downside could come, and that could be at the entrance of the gap there around 452. That gap gets filled at $400.50. Losing that, then you obviously have a retest of the 200 EMA at $385 and change, and the 200 SMA calling for around 368. One thing to note is that the HSI was completely oversold, and you did generate that HSI arrow on Thursday off of the inverted hammer candle. Unfortunately, it did not reverse and created a higher high there, or excuse me, a lower high, and instead you came down for a lower low. So if you came down here for Meta and you created a lower low, the next thing you would be looking at for a potential is a lower high here. So that lower high could be a reclaim of at least $500 and then come back to test like 509, 510. If it does not hold above the 50, then it can get interesting pretty fast. As you could tell right now, the Meta is holding above the 13 EMA. The entrance of the 21 EMA, where a lot of blue chips have come already to test, is inside that gap. Interesting here for Meta is that the HSI also is calling for almost at least oversold conditions. So the next level to the upside, like I said, if you're able to break above this, the lower lows and lower highs to break that trend, would definitely be a break above 510, and you could push towards 531 and then 567.41. Meta does report earnings here, so you could, for these blue chips that are reporting earnings this week, you could just have a lot of chop until those numbers are released. So we're going to have some volatility obviously this week, so definitely keep a close eye on Meta. Jumping over to NVDA here. So NVDA does not have a bearish harmonic or a bullish harmonic pattern anywhere between the daily and the weekly. So what can we expect here in the semiconductor space? Because right now the semiconductor space is selling off. AMD and SMCI, one thing to note that they're completely oversold in my opinion. but they are off of increasing volume. So there's a lot of things going on with the semiconductor space. We had TSM that reported earnings, and they did report good earnings, but it also came down. So we're going to see NVIDIA reports earnings next month. Right now, to the downside, it did lose the 50 EMA. It closed on Friday at $762 there. So if we continue to the downside as I bring out my drawings, the next levels to watch out for would be 732.10. That was a previous fib retracement level. As you can tell, this is where you had a little bit of resistance. You came back down to 681, and then you gapped up and created the new all-time highs. And right now, you are approaching the entrance of that gap there, roughly where that line is at 732. Below that, you fill the gap there at 688.88, where 681.22 is also at a key level there. Losing that, then you can see there's another gap to fill around 630. The 200 EMA would be a retest at 606. The 200 SMA would be below $600 at $570. Right now, the HSI signaling more downside could be incoming. If we go over to the weekly, if it's going to retest the weekly 21 EMA here, like a lot of the other companies have already, that would be at slightly inside that gap. So right now, what's interesting for NVIDIA is that the HSI is completely sold, but the RSI still got room to the downside, as well as the amplified RSI. So it's going to be an important level to watch for me. I'd be looking to see what happens at the entrance of the gap. If it loses that, then you more than likely might fill it, and you lose that 21 EMA. So my next level for NVIDIA, for it to get very bearish and maybe do this inverse V, would be losing that 681. 681.22 would be extremely bearish, and you'd come back all the way down to that $500 range. So definitely keep a close eye on NVIDIA. Jumping over to Netflix here. So beautiful entry here on the dragon pattern. The bearish dragon pattern called the move exactly. We did have a huge gap down off of earnings. You came below target 1 there and almost hit target 2 at 549, and it did close on Friday at 555.04. So what can we expect here for Netflix as I bring out some of my drawings here? The next level I would be looking at for Netflix is to see if it retests target 2. If it loses that level, then you have a bigger gap to fill, roughly just below the 200 EMA. That gap gets filled at 498.96. Losing that, then you could test the 200 SMA around 484. Right now, the RSI is almost completely oversold. The HSI still got more room to the downside. If you go to the weekly, it's roughly testing the 21 EMA, where it is finding support just slightly above that, but that was also, you can see the increase in volume. That could also be due to the earnings. So on the daily to the upside, the next level you would want to reclaim is to hold above target 2 here. Obviously, if you manage to reclaim 591.41, you fill that gap there around 605.43. Reclaiming target 1, then maybe you could start looking for the retrace back up to BC at 886 at 630 and then 643. So it's going to be very interesting to see if Netflix actually finds support here, or if there's more downside incoming to fill that gap. It looks like some of these blue chips also are trying to approach a 200 AMA. We'll see what happens there, but definitely keep a close eye on Netflix, because if they're no support here at these levels, and I could see a more deeper retracement to fill that gap, and that's pretty close there at 502. So definitely keep a close eye on Netflix. Jumping over to Bitcoin here. So we're looking at Bitcoin's dragon pattern. This is a bearish dragon pattern on the daily. I mentioned in my last week's video that we could be retracing to target 1, or very close to target 1 at 57.7K. We got really close. It went all the way down to 59,600. And right now we did have the Bitcoin halving over the weekend here on Saturday. So we're going to see if now the momentum has shifted back up. Normally from the previous halvings, Bitcoin, retraces a little bit slightly before the halving, and then starts to create higher highs and ultimately new all-time highs. So we're going to see how much of that is going to take place. I'm a little worried here because of the whole spot ETFs that are out there right now, and all these smart money now and institutions piling on Bitcoin with these ETFs. I want to see how much of that is controlled. So until we see that level, obviously I'm always going to be looking at the technicals. So one of those technicals that I want to see Bitcoin retrace and break above would definitely be the 21 EMA, where it's finding resistance around 65K. Break above that, then you have the 50 SMA there around 67. More so 69K, retrace above that level, and you can start seeing towards 72K and then 77K, and then we could push even higher. But right now, we're going to wait to see. Volume is still not there to support any breakouts yet in either direction, so you could be consolidating here. Who knows when that volatility is going to come back up again. You did cross the HSI midline on the daily here, so you could see maybe some upwards movement to the upside. But right now, you do have a bit of resistance here On the weekly, you could tell that this is still, this forms in about 3 hours and a half. That is a hanging man, and that is almost probably going to match last week's volume. And on the HSI, you still got a little bit more room to the downside. So right now it's at a key level here. You do lose PT1, then you can come back down all the way to 50K where the 200 EMA is at, and then you have the 200 SMA around 47K. Below, you have target 2 there at 38.5K. I'm not sure about that yet. We have to still see. We could be trading between that 69K and that 57K until something happens with the halving or we get more volume back up. So definitely keep a close eye on Bitcoin. Alright guys, mentioned in my last week's video that I was going to try something new in providing harmonic technical analysis from a user submitted comment. I mentioned that I was going to pick a random comment with a ticker, so as long as it was not a penny stock, that I would cover harmonic technical analysis. And for this week's video, we do have a winner, and that's Rafael Iribarren, 9861. Close second came in IWM. For the person who commented IWM, I actually cover in every week's video, so if you want to scroll down to the description box below, you can click the timestamp and it'll take you right to the analysis. So for this week, we are going to cover ARM, so if you want to participate, make sure you comment down below and I will provide that analysis in next week's video. So let's jump right into ARM. Looking at the 1 day, ARM does not have a harmonic pattern. We do have this bearish dragon pattern that was formed back in January, so we could look at these levels now for levels of support as it is coming down here. It did create a gap up here, and on Friday it did start to fill that gap. So what are the next levels to the downside if there is more selling pressure on ARM, as the semiconductor space was a bit bearish this week? You had NVDA, AMD, SMCI, to name a few, that were a bit bearish and increased volume to the downside. So the next level I would be looking at here would be 82.35. That would be OPR of the dragon pattern. Lose that level, then you come to BC at the 886 from the pattern to fill that gap there around $77 and change. Below that, then it obviously gets bearish to target 1 at 61 and then target 2 at 46. Obviously, this is completely oversold if you're looking at the RSI, HSI, and the amplified RSI. Right now, if there could be more downside, maybe to fill that gap, and then you can find support for a retracement back up. So that retracement back up, would I'd be looking at here for the 4 hour, because we do have a harmonic there short term. You can see that this area is a bullish deep crab here, and you have hop there at 77.41, roughly where the gap is at. So you still could have a little bit more downwards pressure and then maybe find support the next level to the upside, or if it finds support above that gap there, it's terminal bar at 85.61. If you can reclaim that level, the next level to the upside would be looking at 93, 99, and then you would complete the type 1 reaction at $110.88. Above that, then you have target 2 at 126.49. So right now, ARM does have earnings in the first week of May here, or the second week of May. So we're going to definitely see if there is more downside here, or if you catch support in anticipation to its earnings. So you could consolidate, you maybe have a retracement and then pull back for a lower low. But we're going to have to find out and see. So definitely keep a close eye on ARM. Alright guys, that's all I have for you. I will be streaming same time as always from Monday to Friday, market open to market close. So if you want to catch me streaming, link to my Twitch is in the description box below. Having said that, if you guys want to participate in me doing harmonic technical analysis, make sure you subscribe to the channel, you like the video, and comment down below which ticker you want me to look at, and I will pick out a random comment for next week's video. So hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend, and I will see you guys tomorrow bright and early. Take care everybody, and peace.